Chapter 7: The Shuffle. My January 2019 notebook has the following on the inside cover: January 2019, in Nusa Due. Year of work starts with a call from the PM. Oh my, who knows what about? The oh my is a tell. I write that to myself in text when I feel emotions building up, whether beautiful feelings of love or negative feelings of trepidation and uncertainty. This oh my was of the latter kind. I could feel something big was coming. That morning I was preoccupied with thoughts about that scheduled phone call. It could be about the SNC Lavalin. It could be a shuffle. It could be both. I doubt it was the struggles on major policy issues. The government was already abandoning the ones I cared about. While these were not happy days within the government, I imagine it was probably typical for any government that is starting to see the end of its mandate creep up. Exhaustion, distraction, frustration, people getting tired of one another. Given all that, I was not sure what exactly the Prime Minister wanted to discuss. Oh, we can only imagine, right guys? Tim and I were on holiday in the southern part of Bali, Indonesia, trying to get some much needed downtime after the difficult events of the months leading up to Christmas. But given the message that had reached me from Ottawa, I knew Bali would not make for much of a vacation, even with our incredible surroundings. To be honest, ministers do not really get vacations, at least in my experience. Every trip I took for personal reasons, while Mojang ended up interrupted by some crisis or urgent work that had to be dealt with. Bali was a prime example of a crisis vacation. As it turned out, that's where I learned I was going to be fired as Mojang. Ultimately, I would end up having to confront one question: was I going to stay in government at all? I know there is no suspense for any of you reading this. I stayed and served as the Minister of Veteran Affairs for 29 days, from January 14th to February 12th. I resigned pretty much 4 weeks after being shuffled. From that moment, my life, Tim's, and the lives of some who were close to us were irrevocably altered. I don't know if I said that right. As for the one question, I made the right choice. I struggle writing about these events. To me, it all feels kind of boring, a blow-by-blow of phone calls, text, dialogue, and decisions. I have detailed notes about everything. Rest assured that I will deal with the details in the next chapter. There is too much, and a lot of it is really inside stuff. Who said what to whom about this and that and when. And I know my telling of this part of the story here is a little out of order. By this point, all of the government's efforts to pressure me on SNC Lavalin had already happened. The public, of course, would only learn about these events about a month after I was shuffled. Okay, yep, I could... But I guess recounting the ins and outs of these events is important to reveal my state of mind at the time and that of others. It also reveals some of the misogyny and racism that remains in our public life. So here it goes, some of the important bits anyway. When I was told by Jessica on the morning of January 7th, 2019, in brackets, well, it was the night of January 6th in Ottawa, which is 13 hours behind Bali, maybe, I don't know if I'm saying it right, that the Prime Minister wanted to speak with me on an emergency basis. I wrote in my notebook 3 letters, SNC. The government's attempt to pressure me on the prosecution of SNC Lavalin had reached a peak in December in the now infamous and thankfully recorded for posterity, more on this later, phone call with Michael Wernick before the holidays. In that call on December 19th, I had been warned that the Prime Minister would get what he wanted on the matter, and I figured this new call would be about doing just that. I knew shuffling me was an option. Install a more compliant Attorney General. Was I supposed to act like Trudeau's very own Bill Barr and do his bidding? I did not have to wonder for long. Jane called. She was being shuffled to the President of the Treasury Board. She said the line being used was that the shuffle was happening because Scott Brison, who was the current president, resigned. She did not know all the dynamics of the shuffle, but she did know I was going to be shuffled to Indigenous services. The Prime Minister had told Jane that he needed her help to convince me. Let there be no doubt, from the first second I realized I was being shuffled, I felt it was because of SNC-Lavalin. Indeed, Jane later told me that the second the Prime Minister told her that I was being shuffled, she immediately thought it was because of SNC-Lavalin too. I still have no doubt, even after listening to every explanation, rationale, prevarication provided to me, and there is ample evidence, apart from my own beliefs and beliefs of many others, that illustrates this to be the case. Of course, everyone is welcome to their own conclusions. The call, it was around 10 p.m. in Bali, 9 a.m. in Ottawa. Tim was in an adjacent room already stewing angrily. His views of the Prime Minister had only deepened over the years. We'd had a lot of time to talk and speculate about what to come. Tim knew that I had some very unpleasant, inappropriate, and significant run-ins with PMO and the Privy Council clerk. I think part of the reason we decided on a holiday so far away was to try to have a break and a real escape before whatever was to come. But Tim did not know all the gory details of the potential seriousness for the government and the country if the madness were to continue. The Prime Minister's call came through from the PMO switchboard to my phone. He came on the line and shared that a situation had occurred over Christmas and that Scott was stepping away from politics. I was surprised by this. I had not gotten the impression from Scott that he was checked out or wanted to leave politics. I would later learn that Scott had informed the PMO on December 12th that he was resigning. Let us stop there for a second. So Scott Brison was resigning. What did that have to do with me? Put Jane in Treasury Board if that was really what you needed. She is fantastic and has clear knowledge and experience, having already served as the Vice Chair of the Treasury Board. There were lots of great candidates to replace her at Indigenous Services. I even recommended one directly in the coming days, Mark Miller. Oh, guys, I gotta stop there. I gotta interject again. Oh, Jody, did you know Mark Miller was going to turn out to be such a sleazeball? Okay, I'm gonna stop there because I really don't care for Mark Miller. Okay, deep breath. Okay, sorry, Jody. Don't take that personally, okay? I was told he was not ready. Okay, let's just back this up a second. There were a lot of great candidates to replace her at Indigenous Services. I even recommended one directly in the coming days, Mark Miller. I was told he was not ready. Of course, he became the Indigenous Service Minister some 10 months later. Or do not move Jane. She was the star of the Indigenous Services, and there were other great options for Treasury Board. Carla Qualtrough, whom I also directly recommended. Okay, I don't know her, guys, so she might be okay. Or Jean Yves Duclos, I don't know. He actually ended up in the job also 10 months later. Joyce Murray, I was told she was not ready either. Joyce would become Treasury Board President service days later after Jane resigned. We need our best players to move, Trudeau said. He then started talking about Indigenous services. We need our best communicator there, someone with real influence in the lives of Indigenous people in the country. Your voice, your leadership is needed to show how seriously we take Indigenous people and their issues. He shared that I had already introduced all of my legislation, basically stating that there was not much left to do at Justice and that I had skills as a communicator. He used sports analogies. I admit I always respond poorly to sports analogies as I do not watch many sports. I also find it a little offensive to the seriousness of governing when we talk of it in terms of sports, especially when politics is called a blood sport. It orients our politics in completely the wrong way. It orientates our politics in completely the wrong way. I want you, Jody, to be the Indigenous Service Minister. I have in my notes, OMG, I was floored, I was angry, but at the same time I also felt an overwhelming sense of anxiety and calm. My calm came from the realization that my time in this government, one way or another, was changing and likely would be coming to an end. Mostly I wanted to get off the phone. I did not want to say something I would regret that would be disrespectful. Let's take another pause. Why was I so stunned? I was stunned because, as you know, I was made it abundantly clear I would never serve as the minister of INAC, now ISC. I could not and would not be the Indian agent. They knew this and had been told on multiple occasions, including the first time I met the Prime Minister and was vetted for cabinet. It was not a matter of being a team player. One does not choose to go against basic principles and values. In this case, agreeing to the change of implementing brackets not changing oppressive laws was structure that applied to one's own people in order to fit on a team and be a team player. Or if one does, that is pretty sad, and frankly I would not be on a team with such a person. I can't help but think of the words my grandmother spoke about the Indian agents who imposed and administered the Indian Act, how the Indian agents would take kids to residential schools, how my grandmother never stopped her practice of speaking of the white man and the things they had done. When she was speaking angrily of the white man, I know she had the Indian agents in mind. I also thought of my grandfather, Hemas Johnson, who had been arrested, taken to Westminster and thrown in jail, Ocala prison in the Lower Mainland, for potlatching in the early 1920s, a time when the potlatch was outlawed in Canadian law. I did not say anything to the PM for what seemed like minutes. When I did speak, I said I was quite shocked and that I did not know what to say, at least not at that moment. I said I would have to think about it. What I also managed to get out was that it did not make sense to me. This merely let the Prime Minister repeat that this was the only option. Scott Brissot, our need to be compelling to Canadians to show transformative change on Indigenous issues. I finally said what I was really thinking. I cannot help but think this is about because of another issue, one where I would not do that which I was being asked. I was of course referring to SNC Lavalin, but I was being careful given that I did not know if there was anyone else on the call. No, the Prime Minister replied. I reiterated something I had said to him, Jerry, and many other times before, that ISC was not where transformative change happened. I will think about it, I said. Okay, the Prime Minister replied. So yes, I was adamant in my belief that I was being shuffled because of SNC Lavalin from the first moment, while the Prime Minister and Jerry Butts were adamant that this was not the case. These positions have never changed. I presume they never will, but I challenge them to demonstrate that SNC Lavalin was not a factor on their minds at the time. It is for them to explain, for example, why Michael Wernick informed the Deputy Minister of Justice on January 11, 2019, that one of the first conversations the new Attorney General would be expected to have with the PM would be on SNC Lavalin. After I hung up, I sat by my chair trying to wrap my head around the call and what was being said. I called for Tim, who was still in the other room. He came in and said the conversation had been loud, that my voice had sounded elevated on the call, and that he had paced back and forth throughout it. So began a lot of debating, planning, and preparing regarding the next steps I would take. I had to confront questions about the right and best thing to do for the country, the government, and yes, for me. I had to decide whether to stay in government. I believed I was being shuffled for a bad reason, frankly an improper and unethical reason, and it was for a reason nobody would know about when the shuffle was made public. I knew too that I could not be the Minister of Indigenous Services, which they all well knew. Well, and you said that earlier in your previous chapters, Jody. That was me. And there was another reason, a third reason, that I was not sure I would stay. The vision and commitments that had attracted me to Justin Trudeau and his Liberal Party in the first place were now distant glimpses in the rear-view mirror. Oh, if we could only see that guy in the rear-view mirror. There was little that could be done at this stage on the pivotal priorities that had brought me to Ottawa originally. At what point was I just staying for the wrong reasons, for power, prestige, or role, acting like a politician in the worst sense of the term? My limits test of being able to look in the mirror each night and haunting me. Could I do that if I stayed in this government, which was so focused on power and partisanship and so little interest in principle? That was more about image than substance. Was there a difference I could still make? Was there a purpose, a reason to stay? No decisions were coming easily. Jerry and I agreed to talk. We ended up talking several times over the next number of days. I repeated to him what he already knew, that I could not be the Minister of ISC. I also told him on the phone that I knew the shuffle was because of SNC Lavalin. We did not get far and did not say too much. He hypothetically floated whether I would consider being Minister of CIRNA. I said I didn't talk in hypotheticals and was getting uncomfortable with cabinet positions being talked about so loosely. We knew we would be in touch again very soon. I also was back and forth with Jane and Jessica. Neither of them was going to push hard one way or another, of course. I really appreciated their thoughtful counsel. This was especially true when it came to Jessica, who would be so directly impacted by whatever I decided. I was quite concerned about how any decision I made would affect Jessica and all of my staff, but Jessica was supportive while giving me the space to weigh all the options. A true friend and professional, I could tell what they both thought. Fight on, even if it was to try to keep the government's feet close to the fire on Indigenous issues and criminal justice reform, and also on SNC Lavalin, which they both of course knew all about. Even if I was being shuffled because of the issue, it would be harder for the PMO to do what they wanted if I was still in cabinet and staring them in the face every day. But I still had a problem. Even if I were to stay, I could not go to Indigenous Services. I called Jerry to tell him definitely that I would not be Minister of ISC. He seemed very surprised and told me that I was making a, in quotations, huge mistake, that it would cost me personally and cost the government, that politics is a team sport, and that we all have worked together to push for change. Jerry said, "You are out of justice. Those wheels are already in motion, and we cannot have someone with no experience at Indigenous Services," a reference to Mark Miller. "Meet our biggest players, Jody." Jerry was getting mad. Fair enough, I realized I was basically telling the Prime Minister I was not accepting his will. I was exacerbated in an exacerbated manner. Jerry said that he had never experienced something like this before in all my years. Unprecedented. To which I replied, I was not trying to make history here, Jerry. Oh man, guys, I'm really having a hard time biting my tongue. I feel like that person at a movie theater. Okay, sorry, guys. Oh. I acknowledge this was serious and somewhat insubordinate given our parliamentary system, but it was just not possible, and honestly, I think Jerry was more concerned about another issue in all of this, the optics. I knew, and they certainly knew, that this whole shuffle was because Scott Brisen resign line was not going to fly publicly. It did not make sense, and it was an insult to the people's intelligence. They were moving multiple pieces on checkerboard all at once, but the explanation they were offering really only required one or two moves to address. It didn't wash. And then there were the specific optics around me. As I said earlier, I always knew there was an element of symbolic tokenism in my appointment. Certainly for the politically minded folks, moving me made that symbolism, oh my god, hard to uphold. Why were they moving Canada's first Indigenous Mojang? What was the reason? There was another complication too. The West Suwetum protests were heating up in British Columbia. The issue was getting national attention. People were responding and starting to take action. Firing your Indigenous Mojang in the midst of all that could be a big blow. Putting me in Indigenous service might help with their optics a bit, but that was not going to happen. What to do? "So what now? What are your plans?" Jerry asked. "I have no plans. It is not up to me. What now?" I replied. At the end of the call, Jerry said he was going to have to go tell the Prime Minister. The way he said it, it felt like a question, like he was asking if I was sure I wanted him to tell the PM. I thought that was so strange. It was as if he believed I would be scared or upset that he was telling the Prime Minister about a decision I had made with clarity and without regret, a decision they had been told would be the case ever since they met me. That's the problem. Everyone in Canada is running scared, right, guys? Of Justin Trudeau. Okay, yeah, give me a break. Oh. The next day I was put on the line with the Prime Minister. It was testy from the outset. I would tell immediately from his voice that he was not happy, angry even. He said he understood the Indian agent thing. He said that he was acting against advice he had been given, which I understood to mean he was saying he had been advised to shuffle me out of cabinet altogether. "Are you open to being Veterans Affairs Minister?" he asked. I was confused at this option, as this option had never come up before. Veterans Affairs. In that moment I did not know what to say and told him I would think about it. This irritated him immensely. He started shouting. "Oh!" I said, "I am open to it, but I also again mentioned how inexplicable this whole shuffle was." He shouted, "It's the situation Scott put us in," and pretty much hung up. Lordy, Scott was causing so many people so much trouble. I'm not sure Scott had ever been so powerful. Are you tired of this yet? The back and forth does get tiresome, and it made me feel so uneasy. It was basically rounds of the same. I got sick of it. I am sure they did too. The bottom line is they were intent on moving me. I certainly did not want to move. I love being Mojang. But more than that, I did not want them to get their way on SNC Lavaland. I felt a profound duty to protect the integrity and independence of the prosecution. I decided not to resign from cabinet and to accept the position at Veterans Affairs. Serving our veterans and their family is a great honor for anyone. I felt this and knew it was an important portfolio, one that needed some close attention and assistance. There were important issues, including around court cases involving veteran services, built around the underlying principle of how much we truly owed those who sacrificed so much for our safety and protection. There also was a need for government to recognize how the ministry operates to better respect and serve our veterans. This is vitally important and needed work, and I would be proud to try to help with it. At this point, though, some panic also set in. I wanted to ensure that my years as Mojang meant all they could for change, specifically for Indigenous peoples. I wanted to know that it was not all for nothing. I knew we had done so much, but the panic came from knowing how government works on the inside. There was still also much left to do, and I would no longer be pushing things forward as Mojang. But I did have one last piece of work that was ready to go: the litigation directive regarding Indigenous rights. This work had been a long time coming. We'd been tweaking it for well over a year. I asked my department to get it out the door by making it public on the DOJ website. Just want to make sure the time's going. Okay, guys, good to go. The deputy did this. I was thankful. She knew it was important for the work of reconciliation in Canada. It came out on my last weekday as minister, a Friday. It did not get much, if any, media attention at the time. Of course not. Okay, that was me, not Jody. And it still really has not to this day. But it is important, and I was very proud of this directive. I still am. I just hope that it is strongly implemented by government and used wisely by Indigenous peoples. There were other flurries of activity in these last days as Mojang. I released a year in review report. I wanted to make sure there was a record of what had been accomplished. I also had to consider staffing matters. I knew this shuffle would affect many people. Somebody's rolling in. Okay, guys, sorry about that. Got interrupted. All right. I think this is where we left off. There were other flurries of activity in these last days as Mojang. I released a year in review report. I wanted to make sure there was a record of what had been accomplished. I also wanted to consider staffing matters. I knew this shuffle would affect many people. Specifically, I needed to confirm if Jessica was going to come with me to Veterans Affairs. And then there was the looming issue of optics. How would the shuffle be spun by the PM and his team, and what did it mean for me? I knew what was going to happen. Explaining my shuffle would be a mess, and in the warp, dysfunctional political culture we have, the best move for some in the government would be to create a smear campaign against me. They would try to spin it and make it look like the shuffle had to do with me, my abilities, and personality, even if they had to do so subtly and through innuendo. They had done this to other ministers. I had come to know these people and their tactics. I was already hearing the rumblings that were to come from those unnamed sources in the days ahead. I was difficult bracket bitchy, they meant. I was not up to the task in bracket. I was not a regular politician, they meant, or I was incompetent. That was end bracket. I was not a team player in bracket. I was an independent Indian, they meant, not part of the old boys club, end bracket. Knowing all this, I needed to be prepared. Of course, the government would never admit any of this. They shared with me their lines for the public and their plan. In response to my continued cautioning about what was happening, Jerry texted to reiterate what they were going to communicate. Because Scott had left, Jane was needed to step up at the Treasury Board. It was going to be presented as everyone doing what was needed for the team, and since there were currently less pressing matters at Justice than in other major ministries, I was the one among the senior ministers to be moved. Sure, whatever. Given all those factors, SNC Lavalin, the incoherence of the shuffle, the growing blockades and Indigenous unrest, and the expected coming smears, I admit I made an unorthodox decision, one that fits my character but certainly not that of the traditions of a cabinet minister. I decided that if the public smears started to come, as I expected they would, I would explain my shuffle myself. I would release a statement reflecting on my 3 years as Canada's first Indigenous Mojang. I would begin working on it right away. Oh, you go, girlfriend. I would have did the same darn thing, Jody. My emotions on that long journey back to Vancouver from Indonesia were sadness. Being Mojang was much an incredible opportunity and responsibility. The loss of the opportunity to finish the work that had been started, including work that I, like other Indigenous leaders, was raised to do, was devastating. I was also saddened by the reality that politics is treated and played like a game by so many, a game with the ultimate goal of achieving victory, keeping power, and not addressing an important wrong or an injustice unless that is expedient. Could cabinet really be shuffled to do a dirty deed or cover one up or shape a team for the next electoral cycle, but not to get important stuff done? It was clear that I did not really know the rules of this game, and I had broken too many of them. Many of the players are simply trying to stay on the field. I did not know that scoring, doing the things that really mattered and had an impact on Canadians ultimately did not count. What I did know is that it did not have to be this way. Sorry guys, it's really hot right now, and I gotta get in the shade a little bit. Woo-wee! Okay, I might take a water break. Okay, you guys take one too, okay? Okie dokie. As I flew back to Ottawa the next day, I continued to work on the statement that I would eventually release, though at one time I was not sure I would do so. Tim stayed in Vancouver, not wanting to be in Ottawa. I did not blame him. I did not want him to have to endure this reality by coming to Rideau Hall. I arrived in Ottawa on the night of January 13th, all tanned and, yes, jet-lagged, but prepared for the shuffle the next day and the swearing in at Rideau Hall. The only person other than Jessica I asked to be there for my swearing in as Minister of Veterans Affairs was Lee, who already knew what it was like to be unfairly ostracized and exiled by these people. When I arrived to the airport, Jessica and another dear staff member were there to pick me up. Such sadness. They were trying to be positive, but I saw the tears in their eyes. I was trying to keep my shit together as we moved through the airport and waited for my bags. There was no way I was going to cry, not yet. But as we hugged, they started to tear up, and I did too. I would have liked my bags to have come more quickly than that. The three of us drove to my minister's office at the DOJ on Wellington for what would be the last time. On the way, we talked about SNC Lavalin and how it was behind all of us, and how it was behind all of this. They were there, as certain of that I was. My office had already been packed up by my staff. Another senior staff member came in, and there were some more tears. Nathalai, my deputy, said that weird. My deputy also came by my office briefly one last time and handed me a one-page summary of all our biggest achievements. In quotations, I've thought a lot about what I want to say to you. It is this: great women are only appreciated the second time around, she kindly shared. By this point, oh shoot, I lost my page. Okay. By this point, I was fine-tuning my draft statement with Jessica and the two other members of my staff and making plans for its posting the next day, if and when I requested. We also were making plans to tell the rest of the staff who were still not aware of what was happening. Then we simply started sharing memories and appreciation of what we had done and of each other. I shared how much I valued each of them so much, and that all things would be okay. We hugged and said goodnight. I walked out of the DOJ and saw my colored ministerial photo hanging on the wall, knowing that the next day it would be gone, replaced by a black and white version that would hang instead in the long row of former ministers of justice and attorney generals, as was the custom when a new minister came in. Lee arrived at our condo shortly after I did, and we talked much of the night away, while still tweaking the statement. We spoke to Jane and Tim a few times as well. When I finally went to bed, I sat there lost in thought about so much and nothing all at once. The last memory I have of thinking to myself, tomorrow will really suck, big time. I fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, I put on an outfit that reflected my pride in being Indigenous, a wrap given to me by hereditary chief Robert Joseph and his family. It was red and black, which are the Kawakawa colors. It was two wolves on the front and a moon on the back, wolves symbolizing strength, intelligence, and devotion, particularly to family, and the moon a protector or guardian spirit that is associated with transformation. Kathy, my driver, dropped us off in front of Rideau Hall shortly before the cabinet swearing-in was set to start. I got out and walked past the throngs of media, I don't know if I said that right, with Jessica and Lee, my amazing current and past chiefs of staff following behind. I did not say anything to the media at this time as we waited in the dining room at Rideau Hall to go into the ceremony. I saw soon-to-be new Minister of Justice and Attorney General David Lametti. He appeared somewhat apprehensive to approach me, so I went up and congratulated him and then proceeded to offer my assistance in anything he needed. He was gracious and said that he would take me up on that. Then purposefully, with Michael Wernick standing within earshot, I offered Lametti a warning. Be careful, all is not what it seems. I looked directly at the clerk when I said it. Lametti replied, noted. The ceremony took place and I was sworn in. When it came time to acknowledge the Prime Minister, I extended my hand. He reached out to kiss my cheeks as he had done some 3 years before. I was cold. I could not smile, not for him. I knew I was supposed to, but I could not. What a freak he is. That is me, not Jody. Oh, man. I met my new Deputy General Walt Natsky. I don't know. I liked him immediately. He gave me the VAC pin, which I put on. VAC, it says. I told him genuinely that I look forward to working with him and for our veterans and their families, and that I would put everything I had into our success. I told him I had a few things I still had to do that day, a reference to the statement that I was probably going to have to put out. I did ask him for any key messages that he would like me to relate to the media, which he gave me. I reassured him of my commitment and told him that regardless of any media and spin that might come, I would serve proudly and that this file was incredibly important. Just checking the time. Oh, where did it go? Okay. I was sincere in this. I really did not want the attention that would inevitably swirl around me in the shuffle to affect the work at VAC. VAC. I'm just going to call it VAC, guys. Or the perceptions people had of my commitment to our country's veterans. Soon it was my time to go outside to face the press. As expected, the smearing had kicked into high gear while I was being sworn in. I remember the exact words of the first question I was asked and the reporter who asked it. It was about whether I was disappointed about being demoted. I replied no, and I would say that I can think of no world in which I would consider working for our veterans in Canada as a demotion. Okay, alright. Then started digging into my competency. We heard rumblings in the past few months that you might be shuffled because of a performance issue. If you had to do it again, is there anything that you would do differently? I responded sarcastically and then laid out all that had been accomplished. And this is Jody's speech. Well, I can't imagine where you have been hearing that, but in terms of the 3+ years that I spent as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, I'm incredibly proud of the work that I did, supported by the amazing ministers, staff, and by dedicated and hardworking public servants. We accomplished essentially my mandated letter, plus I was very proud to introduce 13 pieces of legislation ranging from complex issues of medical assistance in dying to cannabis, to impaired driving, to incredibly broad and bold reforms to the criminal justice system and family law, the latter two currently in the Senate. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing the new minister shepherd these through to become law. In addition to the legislative agenda, which was eternally robust, as I said, we have accomplished amazing things in renovating and renewing an open and transparent judicial appointments process. I had the pleasure to appoint 250 judges to the Superior Court, extraordinarily something, and diverse judges, and I had the pleasure to appoint more judges than any justice minister in the past two decades, and create 75 new judicial positions. The work that had been done beyond the legislative work has been very rewarding. I'm confident in terms of releasing a directive on Indigenous litigation as the previous minister, releasing principles about how, as the Attorney General, I engaged in charter litigation, has opened up the role of the Attorney General and provided a window into how Attorney Generals make decisions, in particular around charter and in particular Indigenous litigation. So to close, I'm incredibly proud of the work I have been able to do. We've been very successful in advancing justice in this country. I look forward to bringing the hard work, the only kind of work I know how to do, and my strong commitment to serving the veterans of this country. Oh, kind of hung up on that one part there, guys. That was the end of it. But we've been very successful in advancing justice in this country. So much has changed in the last 3 years, guys, since this book has been written. Wow. And that was the only start. As the hours and days passed, the smears that had been fed to the media by the government came fast and furious. The same day, one reporter said this in a question posed to the Prime Minister. We have been hearing for months now from people in your government saying that she has been underperforming many Liberals in your government who were disappointed. As CBC reported, in quotations, that previous one was a quotation, whatever, this is another quotation. Several cabinet colleagues, political staffers, and some public servants have told CBC News they found her difficult to deal with. And some who spoke on background said she was dismissive and quick to leap to confrontation when a more constructive approach to policy differences might have been employed. Indeed, her supporters said she wasn't hesitant to push back when she was confronted with policy she thought was wrong-headed. It is a personality trait she did not try to hide in her public statement. Oh man. The PMO, as was their style, played dumb when it came to the media and leaks, thinking they were playing smart. On January 19th, I had a mid-afternoon text exchange with Jerry. He indicated that word was out with the media that I had been offered the job at ISC and had turned it down, and that he would be telling journalists that government would never go into details about a cabinet conversation, in bracket, though some of it would end up being revealed in testimony at the House of Commons Justice Committee during the SNC Lavalin hearings. He indicated that what he said to media was that the PM had asked to move to take on a vital role, and that I agreed to move for the good of the team. I told Jerry that no one around me would ever say a word about my being offered the job at ISC, and that the leak was coming from somewhere else. Jerry said that he had let many reporters know that it was expected that someone may prefer Mojang over Veterans Affairs, just as Jane would have preferred health over ISC, but he added that we were both team players who would do what was needed when the unexpected happened. And he said that I would still be Mojang if it weren't for Scott's decision to resign. The confusion my shuffle caused, especially among Indigenous leaders and people, also started building at this time. 6 prominent Indigenous experts wrote in the Globe and Mail of the bizarre and incoherent removal of Jody Wilson Raybould. Her demotion from the vital portfolio has been accompanied by inside whisperers based on poisonous stereotypes that Indigenous people and women in particular face every day, that she was angry, difficult, and uncompromising. They went on to say that one finds reflection of many ugly notions that we're still confronting today, that Indigenous peoples are not capable or not as responsible for the achievements and success that they have, that somehow the marginalization of Indigenous people, and in particular women, can be justified, and that Indigenous people somehow are not ready to lead and govern in today's world. Reflecting on what this says about the government's commitment to its most important relationships with Indigenous peoples, the experts stated, by moving her from the high-profile role, the government is reinforcing that the comfortable status quo trumps the real work of reconciliation, that half measures and rhetoric can suffice over real change, the racial and gender stereotypes being used to diminish her only proof that the status quo has already won. Yet again, Mr. Trudeau's professed most important relationship remains one grounded in oppression, colonialism, and paternalism, and the events of the past few days demonstrate that. The rolling out of these narratives made it all the more important to realize the statement I had written. It reflected everything I believe and still believe about the unique role of the Minister of Justice and Attorney General, the accomplishments we made as a government, and my hopes going forward as Minister of Veterans Affairs. It also more critically included I feel like that's simple, veiled warning to the government and to Canadians that the rule of law was potentially in peril in Canada and abroad, and this is not a good thing. No, it's not. That was me. This was part of my continuing effort to keep warning the government on SNC Lavalin. There is a slippery slope. I firmly believe that once the basic norms of a democratic system and respect for the rule of law are violated from within a government, it can contribute to our democratic norms and institutions starting to fail like we see in other countries. Okay, now we're seeing it in Canada. That's me. Oh, man. I still believe that when AGs are yes men, acting more as the leader's lawyer than the lawyer for Canada's, we are in trouble. If for the lawyers than the lawyers for Canadians, we are in trouble. And in typical Canadian style, because of the structure of our parliamentary system and the centralization and conglomeration of power in our media, these episodes tend to play out more in the dark than in the light, which makes it even harder to fight against their corrosive impact. At least in part, I saw my statement as a way to shine a light on these concerns. Statement from the Honourable Jody Wilson Raybould, Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defence and Member of Parliament for Vancouver Granville, January 14th, 2019. And this is what Jody's speech was. I have received many questions and inquiries about Cabinet Shuffle announced today and why I am no longer the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Thank you for all the kind words. While I can understand the interest of Canadians in this matter, I will not be commenting. In our system, decisions regarding the appointment of cabinet ministers are the prerogative of the Prime Minister. Moving forward, I am very proud to be the Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defence. Any opportunity to serve and support Canada's veterans is a great honour, and I look forward to meeting with veterans across the country, engaging with the critical matters that must be addressed, and continuing our government's progress in support and honor Canada's veterans. I do, however, on leaving the office of Minister of Justice and Attorney General, MOJAG, wish to share with Canadians some reflections about my time in that office. Serving Canadians as MOJAG for the past 3+ years has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. I directed in my mandate letter to pursue and achieve a broad, progressive, and ambitious agenda, and I am tremendously proud of our accomplishments. There is very little, if anything, in my mandate letter we have not done or is not underway to completing, and we have also achieved much beyond it. I have attached an overview of these accomplishments to this statement. I thank my amazing minister office staff and the hard-working and dedicated public servants within the Department of Justice for their tireless work and for so ably supporting and the advancement of our agenda. I also thank the residents of Vancouver Granville and all Canadians who have been overwhelmingly kind, generous, and supportive as we work together to help build an even stronger and more just Canada. This work goes on, and I remain dedicated to it, whatever public or private roles I may play. I firmly believe that as a result of our achievements, the state of the justice system in Canada is stronger and better positioned today than when our government took office. Most importantly, the ongoing work of protecting the fundamental rights and freedoms of Canadians has advanced. As I have said before, the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada is in many ways an ambassador for the Charter. The Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada is somewhat distinct from other cabinet ministers because the role is a dual one. The Minister of Justice is the legal advisor to the cabinet. In this capacity, the minister is concerned with the administration of justice, including policy in the areas of criminal law, family law, human rights law, and Indigenous justice. The role of the Attorney General of Canada carries with it unique responsibilities to uphold the rule of law and the administration of justice, and as such demands a measure of principal independence. It is a pillar of our democracy that our system of justice be free from even the perception of political interference and uphold the highest levels of public confidence. As such, it has always been my view that the Attorney General of Canada must be non-partisan, more transparent in the principles that are the basis of decisions, and in this respect, always willing to speak truth to power. This is how I served throughout my tenure in that role. At a time when functioning of democracies around the globe is increasingly under strain and democratic norms are in peril, the unique and independent aspects of the dual role of the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada are even more important. I know Canadians across the country expect such high standards to continue to be met, especially in the uncertain times in which we now live, and I expect this to continue. With respect to Indigenous issues as Mojang, I have publicly expressed my opinions in various venues about the ongoing challenges in transforming what the Prime Minister has stated in the quotations most important relationships between Canada and Indigenous peoples. One of the main motivations for seeking public office was to seek the work of reconciliation, accelerate and advance in real, intangible ways. The work that must be done is well known. We have the solutions. Indigenous peoples have advocated and brought forward what must be done for decades. Countless commissions, studies, reports, and analysis have reiterated the work we must do together to reconcile. The foundation for moving forward is understanding that the dire social and economic realities that Indigenous people continue to face, including lack of clean drinking water, overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, inadequate housing, high rates of poverty, and violence against Indigenous women and girls are directly linked to legislative and policy regimes that have disempowered and divided Indigenous peoples, eroded their systems of governance, laws, and responsibilities, harmed their economies, and denied their basic rights and systems. Long overdue legislative and policy changes based on the recognition of title and rights, including historic treaties, are urgently needed so that Indigenous people can accelerate and lead the work of rebuilding their nations and governments, and a new climate of cooperative relations can emerge. While our government has taken some very important steps and hard work is being done, the necessary shifts have not yet been fully achieved. Rather, a number of the proposals that our government has been pursuing so far require substantial work in cooperation and collaboration with Indigenous people to respect the new foundations for this most important relationship. As a member of Cabinet, I will continue to be directly engaged in advocating for and advancing the fundamental shifts in relations with Indigenous people that are required, and will continue to work with my colleagues to ensure my voice is heard. Again, I express my deepest gratitude to the residents of Vancouver, Granville, and all Canadians who have shown me such kindness, patience, and support over the past 3+ years, and I am excited to continue to build a better Canada alongside you in the days and months ahead as Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defence. And it's signed off by Jody Wilson Raybould under her new title. There are 4 people who have most shaped who I am today. 3 of them are women. My grandmother, my mother, and my sister. Like me, I do not think any of these remarkable women should ever label themselves a feminist or a fighter for women's rights. It was not part of our way talking or processing reality. Yes, we have had profoundly important and distinct experiences that are a result of being women. These include forms of inequality and discrimination. But our way of talking and thinking, instilled by my grandmother, was always steeped in the recognition of the roles and responsibility that women must play in our culture and for humanity as a whole. Balance is central to how I was taught to understand reality. balance within ourselves, balance between nature and human beings, balance between the spiritual and the physical, balance between young and old, balance between all people, including between men and women. Balance means that there are inextricable connections between things. To maintain balance, we each have to do certain things and be supported to do those things. Our values reside in playing our roles and contributing to the balance. In life, our work and purpose is to restore that balance where things have become lopsided, and to nurture it and strengthen it where it does not exist. Boy, do we have a lot of lopsided stuff going on, and we totally need more balance between all. That's me, not Jody. The necessary balance between men and women needs restoration if humanity is going to flourish. When this balance is not there, humanity is like a bird with a broken wing. Generations upon generations of people, women and men, have worked and are working on this restoration. Ultimately, this work requires significant shifts in mindsets, understanding, behaviors, way of relating, and laws and structures. I think this is why I responded as I often did to the sexism around me in government, including in the aftermath of the shuffle. I perceive my own experience of being marginalized within the government and being smeared in ways that only women are as part of the evidence supporting the existence of this lack of balance. I felt that pushing back on these realities was part of restoring that balance. I would show them, I would prove them wrong, I would walk on through, and when I called it out would be a part of a broader effort to educate, build, understand. That was a part of the method of restoring balance. My experience of being a woman in government was in some ways different from my experience of being Indigenous and the racism and paternalism that was a part of it. Central to my teachings in this is the idea that we are all human and are all a part of an interconnected human reality. It is a fact of history that humanity has divided itself, often violently and oppressively, on racial lines. Addressing racism is a necessary part of building conditions of justice that will allow humanity to once again recognize the way in which it is fundamentally interconnected and interdependent. That is, I think, why I have dedicated much of my life to Indigenous rights, to overcoming this injustice, to calling out the violations of those rights. It is also why I responded as I did to the racism I experienced throughout my time in government. It infuriated me, though I think the smears that came after I was shuffled were more typical of being a woman than being Indigenous. It also hurt me how blind they were to their own paternalism. I don't think I'm saying that right. Anyways, to how much they embodied a colonial mindset. The constant attitude within the government was that Indigenous peoples, not only me, but Indigenous peoples generally, did not know what they need or what needed to be done. There was a constant instance, an insinuation that they knew best and knew better what Indigenous people need. I found this to be the attitude of some of my colleagues in government. I also found it to be the case for many parts of the public service. Of course, it had always been this way. This is the heart of colonialism. We know better. Trust us, we do. In the aftermath of the shuffle, it was the fact that racist tropes would be trotted out without a recognition of the racism. That really upset me. For example, there were cartoons of me bound and gagged with the Prime Minister being egged on to beat me, which is completely inappropriate given the reality of MMIWG. Another had me knocked out by the Prime Minister in a boxing ring. There was also one of me dressed like an Indigenous person wearing stereotypical buckskin clothes and feathers in my hair. Together they showed me how far we still have to go as a country, that I truly was the Indian in the cabinet, separate, apart, different, and expendable. Why not playing their game in their way, as Indigenous people have always been treated by government in this country. But here's the one thing about the sexist, racist tropes that were trotted out against me. They didn't accomplish much. In fact, I think that they backfired. Far more people called out these, something acts than engaged in them. Those who knew me spoke out, Indigenous leaders and those who had worked with me, staff and others. But there were also so many I had never met who were just not having it. This included a lot of the media who didn't buy the incompetence narrative that started the second I was shuffled. In fact, some in the media even apologized for their early reporting, and they deserve credit for this. So far, I was grappling with real concern about why the shuffle had happened, and with the terrible things that were being said. I was also reminded of how much progress we have made as a country. While the smears upset and hurt me, the overwhelming positive response to them buoyed me. I am proud to be Canadian, and I was again shown why Canada continues to be stronger. I was also reminded of the importance of the sacrifices that so many have made and continue to make to build greater equity, inclusion, and justice. As had been the case so many times over my years as minister, it was Canadians who picked me up and made me feel able to keep going. Rising, Chapter 7, The Shuffle. At the beginning of the chapter, January 2019, Jody was on holidays when she learned that she was basically being fired from Mojang and moved to Veterans Affairs. She was Attorney General of Canada and Minister of Justice. During that, she said there was a lot of pressure going on from the SNC Lavalin because of the scandal going on, how they wanted her to, the PMO, Prime Minister's office, wanted her to lie about it. Anyways, page 183, she was warned the PM, Prime Minister, would get what he wanted with the shuffling. Jody felt that they wanted a more compliant Attorney General. Jane was shuffled. Jody was smooth-talked during the call. They talked sports analogies, comparing politics to sports, and that both politics and sports are considered bloodbath sports. They wanted Jody to be put in an Indigenous role. What was it? Indigenous Service Minister. Oh, that's what that note was. Indigenous Service Minister. They wanted her to move to that position. And you recall at the beginning of the book, Jody had said she didn't want to be a part of that. She felt it would be kind of like a conflict of interest. Trudeau knew prior that Jody did not want that role. Jody felt that she would be like an Indian agent, or the white men going in and taking, Indigenous people off their out of their homes. And the Indian agents are part of the Indian Act, right? Jody felt that the shuffle was improper and unethical. She was no longer attracted to Trudeau and the Liberal Party. And you know what? I used to be liberal, and we all had that liberal mindset, and they sickened me. Trudeau has really badly wrecked the liberal brand because so many people will not be voting liberal. Jody felt at what point was she staying for the wrong reasons, not able to look in the mirror at night, haunting her. She felt image was more important than substance for the Liberal Party. She got a lot of support from Jane and Jessica, and, they were, involved in all of this too. Jane was moved. Jody said that it was all optics, and that it's an insult to people's intelligence, and that she was used as tokenism. And Jody made up her mind that she wasn't taking the Indigenous service minister position. It was Jerry that said, "Want me to tell the Prime Minister your decision," as though she should be scared and upset. The next day, Trudeau called angry, asked if she wanted to go into Veterans Affairs. He was really irritated when she told him that she would think about it. He started shouting. What a feminist, right, guys? What a feminist. Honest to God. And then look at what's going on right now. Like 30, 40 MPs, Liberal MPs want him to resign. Jody decided to take Veterans Affairs Minister. Jody talked about all the work she had done as Mojag, and that she had more litigation and directives regarding Indigenous rights that she wanted moved. And Jody hoped that her legislation that was implemented was used wisely by the Indigenous people. Page 191, Jody wondered how the shuffle would be spun, if they would spin it about her abilities, her personalities, because they had done this to other ministers, and that they considered her, they would make her like she was difficult, bitchy, not up to task. Jody had said about being an independent Indian and not a part of the boys' club. Jerry told her what would be communicated to the media would be best for the team, because they're so team-oriented. And Jody had felt with the incoherence of the shuffle, the blockades going on with that protest I had just mentioned, which was Wet'suwet'en protest. I believe that was in BC. With all of that unrest going on, she decided to make an unorthodox decision that she would be releasing a statement for herself, her 3 years as Mojag. Jody wanted to give her side, knowing they would smear her. Page 192, Jody talked about that it was all just a game of achieving victory and keeping power. And that's really all that politicians do. And remember, Jody wasn't involved in this type of politics prior to being part of the cabinet, right? She was more about Indigenous rights. So she got a real eye-opener about this. And she said, could cabinet be shuffled to do a dirty deed or cover up? That was on page 192. And because Jody didn't know the rules of the game, right, this new politics, being liberal and all that, she had broken too many, right? So that's why they wanted to move her. Page 194 was her swearing in ceremony. as the Veterans Affairs. And during the swearing in on page 194, Justin Trudeau kissed her on the cheek like he did 3 years ago. Jody felt cold. She had just stuck her hand out, and he kissed both her cheeks. Remember, he had yelled at her on the phone, so that was him being a goof, intimidating. He is the fakest feminist ever. He talks a real good game, right? But he is opposite of everything he said. He is just what he is. He is an abuser through and through. And a creep. Page 196, Jody did her speech about the shuffle. Page 197, the smears came in like Jody had said she's predicted they would. The media had said she was a typical woman, and the Prime Minister's office played dumb like their style. That was Jody's analogy. And they play dumb, and they pretend that they're understanding and caring and, attentive listening and all of that bull. Page 197, Jane preferred to be involved in health, but they didn't put her in health. And Jody was, not only discriminated against because of being Indigenous, she felt it as a woman. That goes into the stereotypes, and they had said that she was angry, difficult, uncompromising, not capable to govern. That was the first paragraph. And she had said that the PMO's office was racist, was sexist, and that, on page 198, that, it was colonization and oppressive all over again, how Justin Trudeau was. Jody had warned Canadians and abroad about the rule of law in Canada was in peril. And this book was released like 2021, okay, guys? And look at how the rule of law is even more in peril right now. And let's keep in mind, this was just before COVID, right? So, there's a lot about COVID that we need answers to. Her speech was on page 199. Jody felt that the dual role of the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice, which she was being shuffled from, right, was like the ambassador of the Charter, and the Attorney General was to uphold the rule of law. So because they're a dual role, they're basically, my understanding, a little bit separate from the rest of the ministers, because they have even more of an obligation to look out for the best interest of Canadians, because they have to make sure that uphold the rule of law. And it's so irritating. I get so irritated because I don't understand how people don't see this. And I think back to this time when I wondered about all of this, and when I talked about it with people, they made me feel like I was a racist. And I'm like, you know what? Why are you not listening to this Indigenous person? I care about the Indigenous person. Why? And you're calling me a racist? Oh, man. I wish I had stood true to myself and paid more attention, rather than worrying about what other people think. And Jody talked about how there's still policies and legislations that are overdue when it comes to the treaties that they were promised, right? Like, they've been promised all this stuff and not given anything. And, it's quite clear. Jody in page 203 talked about balance, which is huge. She talked about we have to restore balance, because when it's lopsided, it is up to us to nurture and strengthen where it does exist. And I think in my reading, I put where it does not exist, and it was to nurture and strengthen where it does exist. And I think that was on page 203, around that. Anyways, yeah, we have went so far one way on the pendulum that we have to go back the other way, but we have to find a balance. And this is what Jody talks about. She said we have to have a balance between men and women, spiritual and physical, nature and humans. Balance is central to understanding reality. And like, you think about kids, I thought about kids there, because they're so wrapped up in their video games. There's violence going on. There's no accountability at school, and kids are living in unrealistic world, and we have to bring kids back to a center. And Jody talked about how the mindset of the government is that they know best for Indigenous people, that they know best, that you should trust them. And look, there's so many broken promises that just Justin Trudeau has done, yet he acts like he has done wonders for Canada when he has broken it. Jody talked on page 204 about how there was cartoons out about her during these smears, that the cartoons of her bound and gagged, and that they were like sexualized and racist. Okay. There was her and Trudeau like punching each other, and that just, when I read that, it made me think about this summer when that boxer that wasn't born a female and pounded the crap out of the female. Anyways, it made me think of that. Well, in page 205, sexism and racism ran rampant in the Liberal Party, and she got an overwhelming support from people, though, during it, who saw through it. And she also talked about how censored the media was in 2019, and we know how much it's gotten even more censored. And the media, some people from the media even apologized for their reporting. But wow. Next chapter is SNC, so we'll find out more about the SNC lava land. I wish I could have looked into it more back when it happened, but I had people thinking I was a racist, and well, geez, I didn't want that, right? How many of us did that because we didn't want to feel like we were a racist? Stay you, stay true, get to talking.